doing tonight? Let me change this. Thank you so much, Arandi. Thank you so much. I thought it was pretty cool myself. Sometimes I amaze myself at some of the things that I do, but I'm trying to be. Let me change it to the one that I think I want. This one right here, especially when I'm trying to read. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Thursday evening wherever you are. You know, a lot of places around the country are dealing with their new, not with their new, with in, good God, hold on a second, with things such as fires, blizzards, you name it, it's all over. Well, we didn't get a bit of ice or snow. It's yeah. So um not a bit. So I thought that I'd get on here and I'd say hello and I'd actually read Dr. Bricato's book because you know I have I have viewers that were referred over here from the interview room with Christmas Dunna and Dr. Bricato when he was on panel over there. And if you don't know about Dr. Bricato, you might go check out his page here on YouTube. He has a bunch of videos and he has obviously some great books that he's written. Go to YouTube, Amazon. Good Lord, I am just getting everything all jumbled up. Go to Amazon and type in Dr. Gary Bricato and his books will come up. And, check them out. Do as I did. Buy the book, read it, analyze it, talk about it. Because true crime is more than just, imagining what the crime is about. True crime is about the analyzing the psychopathy, the antisocial behaviors, the sociopaths, all the wonderful people that make up the avenues in which we talk on this channel. One of the reasons that I like this book is because not only does it bring things to light, it brings them to life. And by that I mean it talked about cases I've never heard before or cases that I've heard, but it breaks it down to the point of how the gradation of evil scale applies to this crime, it applies to this individual, and it's just wonderfully written, in my opinion. So here we go. If you haven't been watching this series that I have going on, you might go check out my page, and I have a whole playlist of the new evil that I've been reading. So I recommend that you go and check it out. Attention-seeking offender driver had adopted a catchy sobriquet that might be utilized in the press. In the enclosed missive, he spoke lewdly about the attacks on Smith and Cockrell and boasted of these prior assaults on Abbotsford women. When he mentioned having bitten Smith's nipple, a fact held back for the public, police knew he was indeed the killer. Details of the other referenced crimes also emerged. It was further alleged that Smith's killer had sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl after grabbing her from behind as she waited outside a friend's house, but she was able to slip away. that he attacked a second female from behind and struck her in the face, and that he had bludgeoned a third with a blunt instrument, leaving her unconscious and bleeding with a nearly fatal skull fracture. Two of the victims had been able to provide descriptions to police, which, paired with a voice recording for one of the driver's taunting calls, were released to the public. The killer's mother, Audrey Ty, recognized his voice and informed the authorities. He was arrested in May of 1996 and ultimately convicted of first-degree murder of Smith and then the attempted slaying of Cockerell. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole for 25 years. In 2000, Driver was convicted for attacks on two of his other victims and designated a dangerous offender, allowing for his indefinite incarceration. Cockerell, making the most of a horrible experience from which she reportedly still physically suffers, heroically took up work as a bereavement counselor, assisting families of the victims of homicide. In category 16, we also find an unusual case of Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood, a female couple who committed 5 serial murders together as part of a love bond between them. Our information about their backgrounds is somewhat limited. Graham was born in California in August of 1963 and raised in Tyler, Texas. Hey, I know where Tyler is. Tyler, Texas is famous for roses. She was described as quiet and respectful during her school days and is always looking somewhat sad. She would later make the claim, never substantiated, that she was a victim of sexual advances made by her father. At 24, she took a job as a nurse's aide at the Alpine Manor nursing home in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Her superior there was Wood, also an aide, who was born in March of 1962. Wood married in adolescence, and when she and her husband separated 7 years later, she was left completely alone. Graham and Wood hit it off right away, and by 1986, a romance had developed between them. Wood reportedly felt passionately in love with Graham, who was the more dominant and sexually experimental. For erotic reasons, Graham enjoyed binding her and choking her to the point of near loss of consciousness. By January 1987, this was no longer enough. The pair began achieving sexual thrills by collaborating to smother elderly female patients at the nursing home. Sometime just before making love. Note that the erotic stimulation did not arise from raping or sexually assaulting the victim, which would have warranted a ranking of category 17 rather than 16. In their first murder, Graham entered the room of a woman with Alzheimer's disease, selected because of her inability to defend herself, and suffocated her with a washcloth as Wood kept watch. The killers felt that their shared knowledge of the crime prevented either one of them from leaving the relationship, thereby strengthening the bond between them. Over the next 4 months, they repeated the ghastly routine 4 more times. The patients, who ranged from ages 65 to 97, were all suffering from some form of dementia and totally incapacitated. Each was asphyxiated by Graham with a washcloth held to their mouth and nostrils, while Wood stood guard. The couple turned the selection of their victims into a macabre game. As I'm reading this, I am thinking to myself, who would do this? But obviously they would, right? Aiming to choose women whose initials collectively spelled murder. When this proved challenging, they decided to count each other's killings as a day, and Wood penned a poem to Graham in which he pledged, "You'll be mine forever in 5 days." Graham repeatedly began collecting souvenirs from the victims in order to relive their deaths, including a handkerchief, an ankle bracelet, a brooch, and a set of dentures, although these mementos have never been recovered. In April 1987, the woman's relationship was beginning to sour. Wood was uncomfortable with the notion of killing on her own to demonstrate her love to Graham and felt relieved and fortunate when she was transferred to another shift at the facility. In the meantime, Graham began dating another female guard. The couple turned the selection. Hold on a second. I didn't flip it. My bad. Coworker, traveling with her to Texas and leaving Wood feeling abandoned for the second time in her life. Graham found hospital work back in Tyler. Eventually, Wood confessed her crime to her estranged husband, and several months later, she related the killing to the authorities. Both women were arrested in December of 1988. During the subsequent trial, Wood copped a plea bargain, testifying in exchange for a reduced sentence that it was the domineering, hot-headed Graham who planned and carried out the killings while she merely served as a lookout. Graham protested her innocence, claiming that the murders were part of a mind game of Wood's. Despite the absence of physical evidence, the jury was compelled by testimony from Graham's new lover, who reported that Graham had informed her of the 5 homicides at the Alpine Manor nursing home. Graham was found guilty on 5 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in 5 life sentences, that is, forever for 5 days. Wood, charged with 1 count of second-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit second-degree murder, was sentenced to 20 years on each count. A book about the case by Laura Koffel alternately portrayed Wood as a psychopathic schemer who may have concocted the entire story to put Graham away for life in retaliation for leaving her for another woman, or else committed the murders herself, then framed Graham for the crimes of which she was innocent. However, this is not the version of the facts accepted by the jury that deliberated the case in 1989. So one of these women did not like to be abandoned. She had abandonment issues. So, like it said, one stood guard while the other did the deed. That is just, I don't know. It is just terrible to think about. Hey, Leslie and Billy. No, I'm not frozen. I don't. I don't know. I hope I'm not. I seem to be going pretty good right now. Our fi- our final category 16 case is of the attention obsessed mastermind type. This is what we're going to read about is somebody who's attention obsessed, and they're the mastermind, meaning that they're very intricate in their conditioning of a crime. Described in the opening of this chapter, few criminals have entered the public imagination to the degree of the never captured Zodiac killer of the 1960s and 1970s, with its haunting letters, internal cryptograms, and techniques for cleverly evading detection. He inspired the fictitious cold-blooded psychopaths in 2 popular movies, 1971's Dirty Harry and 1990's The Exorcist III. Was the subject of David Fincher's acclaimed 2007 film Zodiac, and over a dozen books, has been referenced by rock and heavy metal song lyrics, and is believed to have influenced at least 2 copycats, the New York-based serial killer Heriberto Sita and Japanese child murderer Seito Sakibara. You know, I don't know a lot about the Zodiac Killer, but the fact that he's never been caught, I mean, that's amazing in itself, I would think. I need to go look at that and really maybe even do a live on that. While there have been thousands of suspects in the case since 1968, including a very small handful who were seriously considered, the Zodiac Killer is either still at large or deceased. As a result of his anonymity, we have no pre-offense biographical information to provide. However, we have a wealth of information about his traits and motivations from eyewitness accounts, observation of his various crime scenes, and in his own words, culled from copious letters and cards he mailed to the press and a high-profile lawyer. Zodiac's first murder may have been that of 18-year-old Cherry Jo Bates on October 30th, 1966. Although this was a matter of some debate, at approximately 9:30 p.m., the 18-year-old was beaten and repeatedly stabbed to death with a short-bladed knife in an alley on the campus of California's Riverside City College. There were no indications of robbery or sexual assault, and police could identify no witnesses. After studying in the college library, Bates had walked to her car, which had been intentionally disabled in advance by her methodical and patient killer. There's that word right there. Methodical and patient. Mastermind type. A struggle apparently transpired. Police found a Timex watch on the ground, believed to be torn from the killer's wrists, and the footprint from the size 8 to 10 military style boot in the earth nearby. Almost exactly 1 month later, an anonymous confession containing details of the crime held back from the public was mailed to the Riverside Police Department and a local newspaper, the Press Enterprise. Written in all capital letters, it read in part, "She was young and beautiful, but now she is battered and dead. She is not the first, and she will not be my last. I lay awake at night thinking about my next victim. Maybe she will be the beautiful blonde that babysits near the little short door and walks down the dark alley each evening about 7. Or maybe she will be the shapely blue-eyed brunette that said no when I asked her for a date in high school. But maybe it will not be either, but I shall cut off her female parts and deposit them for the whole city to see. So don't make it easy for me. Keep your sisters, your daughters, and wives off the streets and alleys." Miss Bates was stupid. She went to the slaughter like a lamb. She did not put up a struggle, but I did. It was a ball. The killer proceeded to describe how he disabled the victim's car by pulling out the middle wire from the distributor. He then waited in the library for her to leave and followed her, watching as she drained the battery with each attempt to start the engine. He offered her a lift in his own vehicle, supposedly down the street, as they chatted amicably. We can envision at once that the killer must have seemed trustworthy and innocuous. So we have heard this in the past that there's been a lot of serial killers that have that trustworthy and innocuous personality that gains their victims' trust, and that brings down their guard, and that enables them to have less of a fight, as he stated, than they gave. With no hint of the brutality he had been meticulously plotting all along. As they were strolling along, he suddenly said, "It's about time." To which she asked, "About time for what?" His response was that it was about time for her to die. He explained that after he pounced on Bates, he did feel her breast, but this critical for our understanding of his motivations, he was more focused upon murdering her as an act of retaliation for rejection. Let me say that again. He was more focused upon murdering her as an act of retaliation for rejection. Only one thing was on my mind: making her pay for the brush offs that she had given me during the years prior. She died hard. She squirmed and shook as I choked her, and her lips twitched. She let out a scream once, and I kicked her head to shut her up. I plunged the knife into her, and it broke. I then finished the job by cutting her throat. I am not sick. I am insane, but this will not stop the game. This letter should be published for all to read it. If the account was true, Bates may have known her killer. It seems unlikely, however, that she would have willingly accompanied him to his car at 9:30 at night if she had repeatedly turned him down for dates in the past. It is more probable that they were strangers and that he had known her from afar. She was probably merely a symbol for the killer, an object of focus and displacement for years of rejection by a number of members of the opposite sex, who he had clearly come to despise. And that's what's interesting to me is that individuals find it hard that a killer could only merely kill for that minuscule reason: rejection. Rejection. We see evidence of this in the fantasy of mutilating female victim genitalia. In addition to the scheming, cold blooded nature and misogyny we can induce from the facts of the Bates case and a detailed confession, the killer's reference to the process of stalking and slaying female victims as the game is revealing. It suggests that he drew pleasure from the predatory process as a means of asserting dominance and control over women. We also see enjoyment in the manipulation of police and the press, and a desire to use the media as a means of provoking fear and attention from the general public. A profound egocentricity is observed in these features of the case, as well as his demand that his letter be published for all to read. Indeed, in March of 1971, Zodiac wrote to the Los Angeles Times, apparently confessing to the murder of Bates. But as we shall see it was not unlike him to take credit for unsolved crime possibly perpetrated by other people, as the means of building up his victim count and developing his frightening public persona. In December 1966, 6 months after the Bates murder, a poem was discovered in the Riverside City College Library, etched into the surface of a desk, in handwriting that would later be attributed to Zodiac. Note the lack of capitalization and the poor grammar, almost certainly contrived by an obviously intelligent individual. So there's another thing right there. This individual enjoys playing games. He enjoys meticulously thinking up ways to outsmart the police. So instead of typing in all caps, which he's already done once, and instead of sending a letter, he used a desk to carve out a message. It's like he's playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. Sick of living, unwilling to die, cut clean. If read, clean. Blood spurting, dripping, spilling all over her new dress. Oh well, it was red. Anyways, life draining into an uncertain death. She won't die this time. Someone will find her. Just wait till the next time. R.H. The significance of the two letters at the close of the poem has never been determined. They may be the author's initials, although they are not those of any seriously considered Zodiac suspect. Several months later, on April 30th, 1967, the police and press enterprise received copies of another anonymous letter, this time handwritten. The woman's grieving father received a third copy. Bates had to die. There would be more. Each was signed with an indecipherable letter or number, resembling a 2 or intriguingly a Z. It should be noted that in 1970, analysis by handwriting expert Sherwood Morrill linked the desktop poem and 1967 letters to the individual who later identified himself as Zodiac, suggesting that if he did not murder Bates, he was at least in the Riverside area, insinuating himself into the case. 2 years after the murder of Bates, there was a double homicide in Vallejo, California, for which Zodiac would also eventually take credit, demonstrating knowledge of the crime scene that only the perpetrator and police would know. Shortly after 11 p.m. and on December 20th, 1968, 17-year-old varsity athlete David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen were sitting in his station wagon on a graveled parking area along remote Lake Herman Road on the city's outskirts. Okay, I think I've seen this movie. This just jogged up a memory just now. I think I've seen the movie Zodiac, where I've seen some kind of documentaries or something. Yeah, this is jogging up some memories. It was their first date, and the area was commonly used by young people as a lover's lane. Suddenly, someone approached, firing two bullets into the left side of the car, in which appeared to have been an effort to herd them out of the vehicle's right door. As Faraday emerged, the stranger pressed the barrel of the gun behind the boy's left ear and pulled the trigger, exploding his skull. He fell into the rear of the car, where he expired. Jensen fled on foot and was pursued by the attacker, who from 10 feet behind, under a cloak of almost complete darkness, shot her 5 times in the back, in a remarkably tight pattern. She died on the road, about 30 feet from the car. It would later emerge that he had taped a small flashlight to the scope of his gun, allowing him to see precisely where a bullet would penetrate the victim. There were no signs of robbery or sexual assault, and no witnesses were identified. Many facts of this double homicide are noteworthy in the light of our discussion of the misogyny and the enjoyment related to the manipulation and the hunting of people seen in the Bates case. The killer seemed less interested in the male victim, who was promptly eliminated, and the female victim was pursued, probably thrilling the shooter by screaming and displaying unimaginable terror as she fled in the dark. That makes a lot of sense because he did take care of the male victim first, quickly, methodically, and he pursued the second victim. It was a hunt. So think of some of these other cases that you've heard where there's been a male victim. They're always disposed of first for some reason. Some people think because they might put up a bigger fight, they might even dispose of the killer, but this brings it to light. It could be none of that. It could be like, well, let me get rid of this person because he's in the way of what I want to do. I want to hunt. The killer seemed less interested in the male victim, who was promptly eliminated, and the female victim was pursued, probably thrilling the shooter by screaming and displaying unimaginable terror as she fled in the dark. There was also a similar boastful confession provided to both in the police and multiple newspapers. It came following another murder, which occurred nearly 7 months later. Just after midnight, at the close of the 4th of July festivities on July 5th, 1969, Darlene Farron, a 22-year-old waitress, was sitting with 19-year-old laborer Mike Majeu in an isolated parking lot of Vallejo's Blue Rock Springs Park. As they sat talking, a car abruptly pulled up behind theirs and the driver approached them, holding a powerful flashlight. Imagining him to be a police officer, they readied themselves to show identification. Without warning, the stranger pumped 3 bullets into Farron and 2 into Majeu with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. When Majeu howled in pain, the assailant returned to fire 2 more shots at each victim. This afforded Majeu a look at the attacker. Farron expired about a half hour after the shooting, and Majeu recovered and provided authorities a description of the killer. He was a Caucasian male in his late 20s or early 30s, 5'8" or 5'9" in stature, with a stocky build, a round face, and brown hair. There was, as in the previously described crimes, no robbery or sexual assault. Think of that right there. There's no motive for that, okay? So, minutes after Farron's death, the police department in Vallejo received a call from a man claiming responsibility for the double murder. After directing the dispatcher to the scene of the crime, he added, "I also killed those kids last year," and closed with a deep, taunting goodbye before hanging up the phone. The call was later traced to a phone booth directly in front of the sheriff's office, implying that Zodiac was not only brazen, but he's also interested in observing the police activity he had stirred up. Notably, the killer was also able to view Farron's home from the booth. Moreover, the victim's husband, along with his parents and brother, began receiving phone calls consisting of only heavy breathing within an hour and a half of her murder. Long before the story was circulated in the press, these facts suggest that the killer may have personally known Farron, or at the very least, been stalking her. Let us also note that in the Faraday Jensen case, the perpetrator was more focused on the female in this shooting, as indicated by her being shot more times than Majeu, receiving less serious injuries, which allowed him to survive the assault. On the last day of July 1969, 3 newspapers, Vallejo Times-Herald and San Francisco's Examiner and Chronicle, all received letters from someone who took credit for both the Lake Herman Road double homicide and the attack on Farron and Majeu, correctly specifying the ammunition used, the number of shots fired, the positions of the bodies, the location of a wound to Majeu's knee, and the pattern on the dress Farron had been wearing. He also sent each paper 1/3 of a complex cipher comprised of 408 mysterious-looking symbols, and claimed his identity was contained therein. The author threatened that if the cryptograms were not published, he would go on a spree and murder a dozen people. The ciphers were subsequently printed. While the Office of Naval Intelligence, CIA, FBI, and NSA struggled to decode them, Donald Gene Hardin, a history and economic teacher, sat down to give it a go, later assisted by his wife, Betty. She cleverly surmised that the egocentric type of the individual probably behind the killings and the codes would begin with the word I. She also envisioned that he would use the word kill so that the opening phrase might be something like, I like killing. Her intuitions were on the mark. With that phrase decoded, the remainder of the cryptogram gradually gave up its secrets. The murderer had developed a substitution cipher in which each letter of the alphabet had been replaced by a letter or symbol. They discovered that the creator had laid a series of clever traps. He used one symbol 15 times to lead code breakers into incorrectly concluding that if it stood for an E, the most commonly used letter in the English language, for the actual letter E, he employed 7 different symbols. He also appeared to intentionally misspell words. The disturbing message would lack punctuation, probably as another ruse to impede deciphering read in part. To me, that sounds like a person who liked to play games. I mean, I have not investigated this case at all. Like I said, that little part of him walking up to the station wagon and shooting the guy and then hunting the girl down. I think I saw that in the beginning of the movie, or I saw that at some kind of America's Most Wanted or something like that. But this sound like a game that he's playing? I mean, to send you a cipher for you to decode in order to find the message. That is a game. It's almost like I want to show you that I'm smarter than you. I'm more intelligent than you. You will never get this right. Hey, Detective John, thank you for being here. It, it's interesting about this Zodiac killer because just by reading this, it makes me wonder if, as sad as it is, was it someone who was a member of law enforcement? Was it someone who had criminal justice training? Was it somebody who read up on these things, was proficient? Were any of their family members in law enforcement? Did they have any kind of exposure to these types of scenarios where he knew how to catch a killer? So therefore his game was trying to be catch me if you can type thing. I'll leave you the clues, but I don't believe you'll ever catch me because I'm one step ahead of you because I already know your tactics. So I always leave that little bit out for you to be one step behind me. It's almost like gloating. It's like you'll never catch me because I know what your next move is before you do it. So therefore, I'm going to make sure that I don't give you that piece of the puzzle, and you're going to have to struggle for it. You're going to have to hurt for it. While I'm over here laughing at you, gloating in my own existence. I like killing people because it's so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill. Something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. So, if you receive this letter from an individual, and this is how they describe killing, wouldn't you think that you're dealing with a very methodical, dangerous individual? Because I don't know about you, but being with a female is pretty damn exciting. And to this person, the lack of robbery or sexual abuse or, sexual assault, there's a reason why killing is seen more vivacious than doing either one of those things. So there could be a reason why those things weren't in most of the victims. There was no robberies, there was no sexual assault. And here he's admitting that killing is better than getting your rocks off with a girl. So whenever he's killing, it's more intense than any of that other stuff. And think on some of the crimes that we've heard about where there's been no sexual assault. There's been no robbery. This kind of sounds like a case that we talk about all the time. The author went on to explain that he was killing to collect slaves to serve him in the afterlife. Oh, now it gets a little creepy. This was probably a red herring to mislead investigators into believing that he was delusional or driven by occult spiritual beliefs. But we did not know that for certain, because we're dealing with an individual who's very methodical and a mastermind. That's what this gradation of evil scale is talking about at this point. This is a mastermind individual who is very meticulous and patient in what he does, and he enjoys it more than human contact. Even if it were a total fabrication of zodiacs, the thematic content of his stated motivation was revealing of his grandiosity and hunger for power and domination. It is interesting to note that his message made a reference to Richard Connell's haunting 1924 short story, The Most Dangerous Game, in which Count Zeroff, a merciless hunter who is weary of shooting beasts, lures people to a secluded island to hunt them down instead. It is interesting to note that both Zeroff and Zodiac begin with the uncommon letter Z. The killer's final point in the excerpt provided here lays bare that he was less interested in sexual thrills than he was in the rush of adrenaline he experienced while pursuing and killing a victim, and the superiority he felt while doing so. That's why he would kill the guy first. Despite his promise to provide his name, the author refused to give it in the actual solution. A week after sending the ciphers, he would again write to the examiner, opening with what would thereafter be his ominous nom de plume. This is the Zodiac speaking. He proceeded to provide more uncirculated details about the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Spring crimes. Zodiac's most bizarre attack took place on September 27, 1969. Two Pacific Union college students, 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Ann Shepard, were relaxing on a blanket on a remote patch of shoreline along glorious Lake Berryessa near Napa. Shepard spied a stocky man watching them, who slipped into a grove of trees, only to reemerge and move closer and closer toward them. He was stalking his quarry. After slipping behind another tree, he popped up again, having donned a midnight black ceremonial hood with a rectangular shape and a panel that came down over his chest. It was emblazoned with a cross-circle symbol that might invoke the image of a gun snipe. The man's eyes were disguised with clip-on sunglasses, which covered two eye holes in the mask. On the right side of his belt was a gun holster, and on the left, a 10 to 12-inch blade in a sheath. On the whole, the costume, not necessary for homicide, but probably part of some elaborate psychological fantasy, gave Zodiac the macabre look of a medieval executioner. Several of its features have reminded some of Count Zeroff's haunting attire in RKO's 1932 film adaptation of Connell's story. The mysterious stranger approached Hartnell and Shepard, holding out a semi-automatic pistol. The couple engaged him in conversation, and he claimed he was a prison escapee who had killed a guard and needed money to flee to Mexico. This was no doubt a fabrication to conceal what were his actual intentions from the start. It makes little sense to wear such an elaborate outfit to a routine robbery. It is also peculiar that the attacker waited only moments before revealing his actual objective. One wonders, why would he bother to make pretense of a theft for such a brief period of time, unless catching the victims off guard with a sudden violent assault was part of the thrill for him? The lie may have also served the function of keeping the victim as calm and manageable as possible. It's okay. I'm here to help you. Until they were in clothesline, which he pulled from his back pocket, before the attacker did the same to her. Dennis Shepard and Hartnell lay on their stomachs. The costumed man abruptly began stabbing them with his lengthy blade. He assaulted Hartnell first, piercing his back 6 times as Shepard looked on in horror. She was in turn stabbed 24 times. Following stab to her neck, she rolled over in pain and was pierced in each breast, the groin, and the stomach. The fact that she was stabbed so many more times than Hartnell and in a more vicious manner further supports the notion that Zodiac may have felt more rage toward female victims. But whether there was a sexual element displayed here in the mutilation of her female parts is open to speculation. After the brutal attack, Zodiac quietly strolled away, hiking 500 yards back up the road and drew his cross circle symbol on Hartnell's car door with a felt tip pen, and above it, notation regarding the locations and dates of his various attacks. He then phoned the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a payphone to report the crime. Shepard was conscious enough to describe the attacker when deputies arrived. She lapsed into a coma and died 2 days later. Hartnell, bleeding heavily, survived. At the scene of the crime, investigators discovered a size 10.5 prints made by wing walker boots. As these are special footwear used by military personnel to walk on the wings of planes, it was postulated that Zodiac may have a military background. 2 weeks later, on the night of October 11, 1969, a passenger boarded a taxi in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. The driver, 29-year-old Paul Stein, was driving a cab to make ends meet while earning his doctoral degree in English. After they arrived to the intended destination, the corner of Washington and Maple Street near the Presidio, the car was either redirected or mistakenly wound up a block away at Washington and Cherry Streets. This repositioning of the cab, while seemingly insignificant, has in fact been a matter of considerable conjecture. Whether the reason the passenger proceeded to press a 9mm semi-automatic pistol to Stein's head and pull the trigger, killing him at the scene before taking his wallet and keys, probably to falsely suggest a robbery to police, and a large portion of his striped shirt. Bloody fingerprints, potentially left by the killer, were recovered by investigators. They also interviewed 3 child witnesses who saw the horrific episode unfold from a window. Police did encounter a man lumbering along Cherry, but because their dispatchers mistakenly told them to be on the lookout for an African American suspect, they never stopped and questioned him. It was, in fact, Zodiac. When the error was caught, they were able to give a physical description that matched what had already been established about the multiple murderer. The Stein killing was originally interpreted as a petty theft that had gone badly, but 2 days later, Zodiac sent a letter to the Chronicle taking credit for the shooting, lest anybody doubt him, including a swatch of the cabbie's blood-soaked shirt. The killer also upped the ante, creating a pandemonium by threatening to shoot out the front tire of a school bus, then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. One envisioned the power he might have felt, manipulating the police, the newspapers, and the nameless masses, through which he glided like an unseen serpent. By moving to a new larger city and murdering a random male rather than attacking a couple, Zodiac has altered his modus operandi, so now nobody could feel safe from the unknown killer. This may very well have been his purpose in slaying Stein. One more part of his game. I got to change my MO. On November 8, 1969, Zodiac mailed a greeting card to the Chronicle containing a 340 character cryptogram that has never been solved. The postscript to this note in the card read, "Could you print this new cipher on your front page? I get awfully lonely when I'm ignored, so lonely I could do my thing." The following day, he sent a letter to the same paper claiming that since police had told lies about him, he would no longer announce his murders, making them look like routine killings and accidents. Indeed, or had his ego impugned by his close encounter with police on the night of the Stein shooting. He posited that Zodiac might have sought to overcompensate for this with the terrifying school bus threat and by emphasizing that the cops were incapable of catching him because he was too slippery for them. The killer boastfully explained that on the night of the Stein shooting, officers actually had stopped and spoken to him, and he sent them off on a wild goose chase. Moreover, he might have been scared enough to stop killing, while still craving constant, wide-scale attention and power. In making his statement about no longer announcing his killing, making them appear like garden variety crimes, Zodiac cleverly made it possible to take credit for any unsolved case he wished. He could now keep everyone wondering, confused, and frightened, without having to commit any risky additional murders. Zodiac also includes a hand-drawn, plausible-looking diagram of a bomb, calling it the Death Machine, and his masterpiece, the taunting that it would be a tremendous challenge to try to locate it. On the one-year anniversary of the Faraday-Jensen murders on December 20th, 1969, Zodiac mailed a letter to eminent attorney Melvin Belly, enclosing another portion of Stein's shirt. He claimed that he wanted the lawyer's help, saying that a thing in him would not allow him to reach out, and he was finding it extremely difficult to hold it in check. It is unclear whether this was a sincere cry for help, or as Douglas has surmised, a ploy for sympathy during a probably lonely holiday season. At any rate, he never actually connected with Belly for assistance. How's everybody doing in the chat? I'm frozen. Am I back? Well, looking at the time, it's almost an hour. I've read you're back. Yeah. I don't even know who's in the chat or who's listening from the sidelines. Okay. Consistent with the hypothesis about Zodiac was interested in artificially evaluating the victim count while not actually perpetrating additional crimes. He boasted of 10 murders in an April 20th, 1970 letter to the Chronicle, whereas only 5 could be accounted for. If base is included in the sum. 2 months later, he wrote to the Chronicle again, including the 32 symbol cipher and a map of San Francisco Bay Area with a cross circle drawn over Mount Diablo, surrounded by mysterious numbers. He claimed two clues would lead them to the location of a bomb, supposedly buried and set to detonate in the autumn, which never transpired. Zodiac also boasted that he had killed 12 victims, vaguely claiming credit for shooting a man sitting in a parked car, a possible reference to the recent never solved killing of a police sergeant, Richard Radatek. This execution was supposedly an act of retribution for noncompliance with a request Zodiac made in late April that people wear buttons featuring his cross circle symbol. He claimed in yet another letter sent to the paper on July 24, 1970, that as further payback for this flight, he carried out an unsolved crime reported in the press involving a woman named Kathleen Johns. Elements of the case, which rung true to Zodiac's patterns, have kept debate alive about whether he was indeed responsible for her harrowing experience on March 22, 1970. That night, Johns was driving from San Bernardino to Petaluma, 7 months pregnant, and sitting alongside her 10-month-old daughter. On a highway near Modesto, a man in a car behind her began honking and flashing its headlights, prompting her to pull off the road. The driver pulled up, explaining with credible concern that he had noticed her right rear wheel wobbling. He offered to tighten the lug nuts. After doing so, the apparent Good Samaritan drove off and John began to merge back onto the highway. Just then, the proportionally tightened wheel detached itself, and the stranger returned, now offering the stranded woman a lift to the nearest gas station. She boarded his car with her young daughter. It struck John as odd that they in fact sped past several stations without stopping, and that he would change the subject whenever she pointed this out. At some point she asked, "Do you always go around helping people on the road like this?" He reportedly responded, "When I get through with them, they don't need any help." They drove for about 30 minutes back and forth around the back roads of the town of Tracy, until he abruptly turned to her and remarked, "You know you're going to die. You know I'm going to kill you." To this he added, "I'm going to throw the baby out." When the driver stopped at the intersection, John sprung from the car with their daughter and hid in a field, prompting the driver to pursue them with a flashlight while calling out that she had no need to fear him. This called to mind the false reassurance given to Hartnell and Shepard before they were viciously stabbed at Lake Berryessa. "It's okay. I'm here to help you." The driver ultimately gave up on finding Johns and her infant and left the scene. Her car was later discovered torched and gutted out. While speaking with the investigators after the ordeal, Johns reportedly recognized the face on a Zodiac wanted poster in the police station as that of the man who had taken her and her child on the terrifying ride. If the Bates murder in 1966 was indeed the work of Zodiac, the similar method of posing as a kind-hearted stranger who offers a lift to a young woman whose car he has sabotaged does make this case worth considering. So let me ask you a question while I'm thinking about this, because my mind is going wild right now. You remember in the Idaho 4 case, very early on, where they were focusing on Brian helping somebody who was in an emergency state. He brought a defibrillator, I think, and they were able to save that person's life. I've always thought this, and I even commented on this on one of my videos. The Good Samaritan. What better way to get close to somebody, to bring down their guard, than to be the Good Samaritan? You know, they said there was no interaction with any of these 4 victims. You know, I don't like using what if or it could have been or whatever, any of that stuff. How could it have been coincidental that maybe he ran into one of these four at their time of need and played the Good Samaritan role, helped him out, and then started being around more and more and more, not necessarily stalking, but surveying the situation. This guy was methodical and patient. And I know Dr. Brucato said he placed Brian on the gradations of evil at 16. This is 16. The mastermind, the patient, methodical. You notice this guy didn't have any sexual assault, no robberies. Same thing at the Idaho Fork house. I just thought of that when I was reading that about the Good Samaritan, because that was brought up very early on that Brian was a security guard or something, and one of his coworkers or somebody was having an emergency situation. He brought the defibrillator, saved the person. He was given all these accolades. So that tells you, in order to get close to someone, what better way to get close to someone than to pose as a non-threatening person? So you don't always have to know the person that you want to kill, obviously. You just have to gain their trust so they can allow you to get close enough to kill them. And part of the game is hunting them down. So the hunt would be the surveillance and the meticulous foresight and how to plan this out. I don't know. Just food for thought. Zodiac sent the Chronicle one of his most good Lord, peculiar letters on July 26, 1970. Returning to his narcissistic wish to see people wearing Zodiac pins and his alleged belief that he would someday be the master of those he has killed in the afterlife, he made a new threat, which revealed a sadistic nature not readily detected from his expedient murders that involved no intentional prolongation of pain. He also upped his supposed victim count to 13. He wrote, "If you do not wear any type of buttons, I shall, on top of everything else, torture all 13 of my slaves that I have waiting for me in paradise. Some I shall tie over ant hills and watch them scream and twitch and squirm. Others shall have pine splinters driven under their nails and then burned. Others shall be placed in cages, fed salt beef until they are gorged. Then I shall listen to their pleas for water, and I shall laugh at them. Others will hang by their thumbs and burn in the sun. Then I will rub them down with deep heat to warm them up. Others I shall skin them alive and let them run around screaming." Then, attempting a theatrical creative turn, the killer began paraphrasing the song "The Punishment Fit for the Crime" from W.S. Gilbert's and Arthur Sullivan's 1885 comic operetta "The Mikado." He altered part of the little list laid out in the lyrics to provide a litany of things he would like to do to slaves, and in a sense to everyone who had ever irked or slighted him. "And all billiard players I shall have them play in a darkened dungeon cell with crooked cues and twisted shoes. Yes, I shall have great fun inflicting the most delicious of pain to my slaves." Zodiac then switched from parodying the titular emperor in the operetta Coco, the Lord High Executioner, to Tipu. It is interesting as we consider Zodiac's identification with this character to note that prior to earning this lofty, murderous position, Coco was a rather insignificant individual who had worked as a tailor. We did not know if was a tailor. Certainly, his outfit at Lake Berryessa does suggest some skill with sewing. But at any rate, it is easy to see why the concept of a commonplace person suddenly holding the power of life and death in his hands might have appealed to him. Part of Zodiac's map that he ran, as someday it may happen, that a victim must be found. I've got a little list. I've got a little list of society offenders who might well be underground, who would never be missed, who would never be missed. The list ends, but it really doesn't matter whom you placed upon the list, for none of them be missed. None of them be missed. It is interesting to note that while the tune was intended to communicate the smallness and worthlessness of possible future victims, it could also be interpreted as referring to Zodiac himself, to his own feelings of invisibility. Note that Zodiac followed up his petty tirade with unrelated comments about his Mount Diablo code and the bomb he had allegedly hidden underground. This seems in accord with the aforementioned hypothesis by Douglas regarding the killer's compensation for feelings of inferiority with dramatic violent threats. On October 27, 1970, Paul Avery, the Chronicle reporter covering the Zodiac case, received a disturbing Halloween card featuring a skeleton on the cover with the words, "From your secret pal. I feel it in my bones. You ache to know my name, and so I'll clue you in." Inside the printed message read, "But then, why spoil the game?" Boo! Zodiac had pasted the skeleton alongside the text, suspended in the fashion of a crucified person. He marked the card up with his cross circle symbol, the words "Paradise," "Enslaved," "Surrounded by fire, by gun, by knife, and by rope." Images appearing eyes, and the ominous threat, "Peekaboo, you are doomed." Soon thereafter, Avery received an anonymous letter which first brought to light the possible link between the Cherry Joe Bates murder and the Zodiac case. 4 months after Avery unearthed the Riverside case, Zodiac wrote for the first time to the Los Angeles Times, the paper with the largest circulation in California, which comes as no surprise. Needling the authorities for their failure to apprehend him, he wrote, "I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity, but they're only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there. The reason that I'm writing to the Times is this. They don't bury me on the back pages like some of the others." After confessing to a crime he may not have committed, he gave his latest, probably grossly exaggerated victim tally of 17. After this, Zodiac fell silent for years, perhaps due to incarceration or a period of treatment in a psychiatric hospital. The next confirmed letter from Zodiac was sent to the Chronicle in late January of 1974. This time he praised William Friedkin's 1973 film The Exorcist, based upon William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel of the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. In addition to the more dark Mikado humor, he included a peculiar, never-explained symbol in the new murder tally of 37. 6 months later, the killer penned an anonymous note to the same paper in a distinctive penmanship, but lacking the usual, probably intentionally misspelled words, which helped to establish that he was feigning poor spelling all along. He expressed consternation concerning the paper's poor taste and the lack of sympathy in running ads for Terrence Malick's 1973 film The Badlands, loosely based upon the real-life 1958 killing spree of Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate, and set in the year following their actual crimes. The advertisements read, in 1959, most people were killing time. Kit and Holly were killing people. Zodiac remarked, in the light of recent events, this kind of murder glorification can only be deplorable at best. Not the glorification of violence was ever justifiable. 2 months later, Zodiac appears to have sent another anonymous note to the Chronicle, this time voicing pseudo-concern about anti-feminist columnist Count Marco Spinelli. Put Marco back in the hellhole from whence it came. He has a serious psychological disorder. Always need to feel superior. I suggest you refer him to a shrink. This was, of course, the proverbial pot calling the kettle black, and was probably penned in an iconic tone for the killer's own amusement. And that's where I'm going to stop tonight because my mouth is getting dry and really a lot to take in. Zodiac is a really interesting case. And like I said, Dr. Brucato and his co-authors did an amazing job bringing this book to life, as well as explanation of what each and every case brings in the gradations of evil scale. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. Please remember to hit the like button if you haven't already, and subscribe button if you haven't. And I want to tell the subscriber that came over from the interview room, I know that I don't read this book all the time, but I try to keep my show very, what's the word? Diversified, where I don't just burn out because I just do one thing. So please don't unsubscribe just because I'm not reading a book. If you don't really like the other content, I understand. But just hit your notification button, and when I do read the book, feel free to come in and even chat, because we have a place of chat where people are not going to be any kind of way other than kind to you. We have a very diversified chat, and they're very, very good with their words, and they're very good with their kindness. So with that, I'm just going to ask the maestro to play you some music before I get out of here. You have a wonderful night. See you soon.